Hello everybody, and welcome to Monster Mondays, albeit it's after midnight on Tuesday, but it would have uploaded late anyway because I had work today. Anywho, so for our story tonight, it's going to be Jeff the Killer. This is one of those older creepypastas of sorts that I think dates back maybe 2010, 2011. Certainly came before I wrote my Out of the Forsaken creepypasta, and if the name scheme weren't obvious enough, I more or less wrote my character kind of using the original creepypasta as a template of Jeff the Killer. Just in terms of how it was phrased and what the overall structure of how I would tell the story. Now, interestingly enough, they did do a reboot of this particular one, so I figured instead of wasting the time trying to fix what ain't broken, or what is otherwise not spoiling anyone else's enjoyment, I decided to instead cover both the original and the reboot so we can see what improvement was made between the two. And that would work just as well, because if I gotta be honest, my grammar checker's so nitpicky. It's mostly, writing rules that some of these pastas violate that wouldn't sound any different when written out loud, or if at all, not noticeably. So without further ado, here we go. Jeff the Killer. Creepypasta story. Excerpt from a local newspaper. Ominous unknown killer is still at large. After weeks of unexplained murders, the ominous unknown killer is still on the rise. After little evidence has been found, a young boy states that he survived one of the killer's attacks and bravely tells his story. By the way, doesn't this sound like kind of the opening to my Returns creepypasta for Out of the Forsaken, for those who saw the first Monster Mondays? Just food for thought. I had a bad dream and woke up in the middle of the night, says the boy. I saw that for some reason the window was open, even though I remember it being closed before I went to bed. I got up and shut it once more. Afterwards, I simply crawled under my covers and tried to get back to sleep. That's when I had a strange feeling like someone was watching me. I looked up and nearly jumped out of my bed. There in the little ray of light illuminating from between my curtains were a pair of two eyes. These weren't regular eyes, they were dark and ominous eyes. They were bordered in black and just plain out terrified me. It's when I saw his mouth, a long horrendous smile that made every hair on my body stand up. The figure stood there watching me. Finally, after what seemed like forever, he said it, a simple phrase, but said it in a way only a madman could speak. He said, "Go to sleep." I let out a scream. That's what sent him at me. He pulled out a knife, aiming at my heart. He jumped on top of my bed. I fought him back. I kicked, I punched, I rolled around trying to knock him off me. That's when my dad busted in. The man threw a knife. It went in my dad's shoulder. The man probably would have finished him off if one of the neighbors hadn't alerted the police. And by the way, this particular story actually kept me up a few nights back when it was fairly new, and I'm thinking, man, wow. I mean, I would literally just look around the bushes when I'd walk home and everything, because I live in a pretty well-to-do area. If you didn't see what my house looked like in one of my Writer Wednesday videos, so it's exactly the type of scenery that was described in the Jeff the Killer series for where he had moved in the origin story. Anyway, commentary aside, I'll resume. I drove into the parking lot and ran towards the door. The man turned and ran down the hallway. I heard a smash like glass breaking. As I came out of my room, I saw the window that was pointing towards the back of my house was broken. I looked out to see him vanish in the distance. I can tell you one thing, I will never forget that face. Those cold, evil eyes, that psychotic smile will never leave my head. Police are still on the look for this man. If you see anyone that fits his description in the story, please contact your local police department. And here we get to the origin story part. Jeff and his family had just moved into a new neighborhood. His dad got a promotion at work and they thought it would be best to live in one of those fancy neighborhoods. Jeff and his brother Lou couldn't complain though. A new, better house, what was not to love? And boy, houses today are expensive as heck, so that would have been one hell of a promotion, I'm sure. As they were getting unpacked, one of their neighbors came by. Hello, she said. I'm Barbara. I live across the street from you. I just want to introduce myself and introduce my son. She turns and calls her son over. Billy, these are new neighbors. They said hi and ran back to play in his yard. Well, said Jeff's mom, I'm Margaret, and this is my husband Peter, and my two sons, Jeff and Lou. They each introduced themselves, and then Barbara invited them to her son's birthday. Jeff and his brother were about to object when their mother said they would love to. When Jeff and his family had done packing, Jeff went to his mom. Why would you invite us to some kid's party? If you haven't noticed, I'm not some dumb kid. Jeff, said his mother, we just moved here. We should show that we want to spend time with our neighbors. And we're going to that party, and that's final. Jeff started to talk, but stopped himself knowing he couldn't do anything. Whenever his mom said something, it was final. He walked up to his room and plopped down on his bed. He sat there looking at the ceiling when suddenly he got a weird feeling. Not so much pain, but a weird feeling. He dismissed it as just some random feeling. He heard his mother call him down to get his stuff, and he walked down to get it. The next day, Jeff walked downstairs to get breakfast and got ready for school. As he sat there eating his breakfast, he once again got that feeling. This time it was stronger. It gave him a slight tugging pain, but he once again dismissed it. As he and Lou finished breakfast, they walked down to the bus stop, and they sat there waiting for the bus. All of a sudden, some kid on a skateboard jumped over them just inches above their laps. They both jumped back in surprise. Hey, what the hell? The kid landed and turned back to them. He kicked the skateboard up and caught it with his hands. The kid seemed to be about 12, 1 year younger than Jeff. He wears an Aeropostale shirt and ripped blue jeans. Well. Looks like we've got some new meat. Suddenly the other two kids appeared. One was super skinny, the other was huge. Well, since you're new here, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Over there is Keith. Jeff and Lou looked over to the skinny kid. He had a dopey face you'd expect a sidekick to have. And he's Troy. They looked over at the fat kid. Talk about a tub of lard. This kid looked like he hasn't exercised since he was crawling. And I, said the first kid, am Randy. Now, for all the kids in this neighborhood, there's a small price for bus fare, if you catch my drift. Lou stood up ready to punch the lights out of the kid's eyes when one of his friends pulls a knife on him. Tisk, I hope you'd have been more cooperative, but it seems we must do it the hard way. The kid walked up to Lou and took the wallet out of his pocket. Jeff got that feeling again. Now it was truly strong, a burning sensation. He stood up, but Lou gestured him to sit down. Jeff ignored him and walked up to the kid. Listen here, you little punk. Give back my bro's wallet or else. Randy put the wallet in his pocket and pulled out his own knife. Oh, and what will you do? He just finished the sentence. Jeff popped the kid in the nose as Randy reached for his face. Jeff grabbed the kid's wrist and broke it. Randy screamed and Jeff grabbed the knife from his hand. Troy and Keith rushed Jeff, but Jeff was too quick. He threw Randy to the ground. Keith lashed out at him, but Jeff ducked and stabbed him in the arm. Keith dropped his knife and fell to the ground, screaming. Troy rushed to him, too, but Jeff didn't even need the knife. He just punched Troy straight in the stomach, and Troy went down. As he fell, he puked all over. Lou could do nothing but look in amazement at Jeff. Jeff, how do you... was all he said. They saw the bus coming and knew they'd be blamed for the whole thing, so they started running as fast as they could. As they ran, they looked back and saw the bus driver rushing over to Randy and the others. As Jeff and Lou made it to school, they didn't dare tell what happened. All they did was sit and listen. Lou just thought of that as his brother beating up a few kids, but Jeff knew it was more. It was something scary. As he got that feeling, he felt how powerful it was, the urge to just hurt someone. He didn't like how it sounded, but he couldn't help feeling happy. He felt the strange feeling go away and stay away for the entire day of school. Even as he walked home due to the whole thing near the bus stop and how he probably wouldn't be taking the bus anymore, he felt happy. When he got home, his parents asked him how his day was, and he said in a somewhat ominous voice, "It was a wonderful day." Next morning, he heard a knock at his front door and walked down to find two police officers at the door, his mother looking back at him with an angry look. "Jeff, these officers tell me that you attacked 3 kids, that it wasn't regular fighting, and that they were stabbed." "Stabbed, son?" Jeff's gaze fell to the floor, showing his mother that it was true. "Mom, they were the ones who pulled the knives on me and Lou." "Son," said one of the cops, "we found 3 kids, 2 stabbed, 1 having a bruise on his stomach, and we have witnesses proving you fled the scene. Now what does that tell us?" Jeff knew it was no use. He could say him and Lou had been attacked, but there was no proof that it was not them who attacked first. They couldn't say they weren't fleeing because, truth be told, they were. So Jeff couldn't defend himself or Lou. "Then call down your brother." Jeff couldn't do it since it was he who beat up all the kids. "Sir, it was me. I was the one who beat up the kids. Lou tried to hold me back, but he couldn't stop me." The cop looked at his partner and they both nodded. "Well, kid, looks like a year in juvie." "Wait," says Lou. They looked up to see him holding the knife. The officers pulled their guns out and locked them on Lou. "It was me. I beat up those little punks. Have the marks to prove it." He lifted up his sleeves to reveal cuts and bruises as if he was in a struggle. "Son, just put the knife down," said the officer. Lou held up the knife and dropped it to the ground. He put his hands up and walked over to the cops. "No, Lou, it was me. I did it." Jeff had tears running down his face. Poor bro, trying to take the blame for what I did. "Well, take me away." The police led Lou out to the patrol car. "Lou, tell them it was me. Tell them. I was the one that beat up those kids." Jeff's mother put her hands on his shoulders. "Jeff, please, you don't have to lie. We know it's Lou. You can stop." Jeff watched helplessly as the cop car speeds off with Lou inside. A few minutes later, Jeff's dad pulled into the driveway, seeing Jeff's face and knowing something was wrong. Son, what is it?" Jeff couldn't answer. His vocal cords were strained from crying. Instead, Jeff's mother walked his father inside to break the bad news to him, as Jeff wept in the driveway. After an hour or so, Jeff walked back into the house, seeing his parents were both shocked, sad, and disappointed. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't see how they thought of Lou when it was his fault. He just went to sleep, trying to get the whole thing off his mind. 2 days went by with no word from Lou at JDC. No friends to hang out with, nothing but sadness and guilt. That is, until Saturday, when Jeff was woken up by his mother with a happy, sunshiny face. "Jeff, it's the day," she said as she opened up the curtains and let light flood into his room. What's today?" asked Jeff as he stirs awake. "It's Billy's party." He was now fully awake. "Mom, you're joking, right? You don't expect me to go to some kid's party after..." There was a long pause. "Jeff, we both know what happened. I think this party could be the thing that brightens up the past days. Now get dressed." Jeff's mother walked out of the room downstairs to get ready herself. He fought himself to get up. He picked out a random shirt and a pair of jeans and walked downstairs. He saw his mother and father all dressed up, his mother in a dress and his father in a suit. He thought why they would ever wear such fancy clothes to a kid's party. "Son, is that all you're going to wear?" said Jeff's mom. "Better than wearing too much," he said. His mother pushed down the feeling to yell at him and hid it with a smile. "Now, Jeff, we may be overdressed, but this is how you go if you want to make an impression," said his father. Grunder went back up to his room. "I don't have any fancy clothes," he yelled downstairs. "Just pick out something," called his mother. He looked around his closet for what he would call fancy. He found a pair of black dress pants he had for special occasions and an undershirt. He couldn't find a shirt to go with it, though. He looked around and found only striped and patterned shirts, none of which go with dress pants. Finally, he found a white hoodie and put it on. You're wearing that, they both said. His mother looked at her watch. Oh no, time to change. Let's go. Sorry, oh no, time to change. Let's just go. She said as she herded Jeff and his father out the door. They crossed the street over to Barbara and Billy's house. They knocked on the door and it appeared that Barbara, just like his parents, way overdressed. As they walked inside, all Jeff could see were adults, no kids. The kids are out in the yard, Jeff. How about you go and meet some of them, said Barbara. Jeff walked outside to a yard full of kids. They were running around in weird cowboy costumes and shooting at each other with plastic guns. He might as well be standing in Toys R Us. Suddenly a kid came up to him and handed him a toy gun and hat. Hey, you want to play? He said. No kid, I'm way too old for this stuff. The kid looked at him with that weird puppy dog face. Please, said the kid. Fine, said Jeff. He put on the hat and started to pretend and shoot at the kids. At first he thought it was totally ridiculous, but then he started to actually have fun. It might not have been super cool, but it was the first time he'd done something that took his mind off Lou. So he played with the kids for a while until he heard a noise. A weird rolling noise, then it hit him. Randy, Troy, and Keith all jumped over the fence on their skateboards. Jeff dropped the fake gun and ripped off the hat. Randy looked at Jeff with burning hatred. Hello, Jeff, is it? He said. We have some unfinished business. Jeff saw his bruised nose. I think we're even. I beat the crap out of you and you got my brother sent to JDC. Randy got an angry look in his eyes. Oh no, I don't go for even. I go for winning. You may have kicked our asses that one day, but not today. As he said that, Randy rushed at Jeff. They both fell to the ground. Randy punched Jeff in the nose. And Jeff grabbed him by the ears and headbutted him. Jeff pushed Randy off of him and both rose to their feet. Kids were screaming and parents were running out of the house. Troy and Keith both pulled guns out of their pockets. No interrupts or guts will fly, they said. Randy pulled a knife on Jeff and stabbed it into his shoulder. Jeff screamed and fell to his knees. Randy started kicking him in the face. After 3 kicks, Jeff grabs his foot and twists it, causing Randy to fall to the ground. Jeff stood up and walked towards the back door. Troy grabbed him. Need some help? He picks Jeff up by the back of the collar and throws him through the patio door. As Jeff tries to stand, he's kicked down to the ground. Randy repeatedly starts kicking Jeff until he starts to cough up blood. Come on, Jeff, fight me. He picks up Jeff and throws him into the kitchen. Randy sees a bottle of vodka on the counter and smashes the glass over Jeff's head. Fight! He throws Jeff back into the living room. Come on, Jeff, look at me. Jeff glances up, his face riddled with blood. I was the one that got your brother sent to JDC, and now you're just going to sit here and let him rot for a whole year? You should be ashamed. Jeff starts to get up. Oh, finally you stand and fight. Jeff is now on his feet, blood and vodka on his face. Once again he gets that strange feeling, the one he hasn't felt in a while. Finally he's up, says Randy as he runs at Jeff. That's when it happens. Something inside Jeff snaps. His psyche is destroyed. All rational thinking is gone. All he can do is kill. He grabs Randy and drives him to the ground. He gets on top of him and punches him straight in the heart. The punch causes Randy's heart to stop. As Randy gasps for breath, Jeff hammers down on him, punch after punch. Blood gushes from Randy's body until he takes one final breath and dies. Everyone's looking at Jeff now, the parents, the crying kids, and even Troy and Keith. All they easily break their gaze and point their guns at Jeff. Jeff sees the guns trained on him and runs for the stairs. As he runs, Troy and Keith let out fire on him, each shot missing. Jeff runs up the stairs. He hears Troy and Keith follow up behind. As they let out their final rounds of bullets, Jeff ducks into the bathroom. He grabs a towel rack and rips it off the wall. Troy and Keith race in, knives ready. Troy swings his knife at Jeff, who backs away and bangs the towel rack on Troy's face. Troy goes down hard, and all that's left is Keith. He's more agile than Troy, though, and ducks when Jeff swings the towel rack. He dropped the knife and grabbed Jeff by the neck and punched him into the wall. A thing of bleach fell on top of him from the top shelf. It burnt both of them, and they both started to scream. Jeff wiped his eyes as best he could. He pulled back the towel rack and swung it straight into Keith's head. As he lay there bleeding to death, he let out an ominous smile. What's so funny? Asked Jeff. Keith pulled out a lighter and switched it on. "What's funny," he said, "is that you're covered in bleach and alcohol." Jeff's eyes widened as Keith threw the lighter at him. Soon the flame made contact with him. The flames ignited the alcohol and the vodka, while the alcohol burned him and the bleach burned his skin. Jeff let out a horrible screech as he caught on fire. He tried to roll out the fire, but it was no use. The alcohol had made him a walking inferno. He ran down the hall and fell down the stairs. Everybody started screaming and saw Jeff, now a man on fire, drop to the ground nearly dead. The last thing Jeff saw was his mother and other parents trying to extinguish the flame. That's when he passed out. When Jeff woke, he had a cast wrapped around his face. He couldn't see anything but felt a cast on his shoulder and stitches all over his body. He tried to stand up, but he realized there was some tube in his arm, and when he tried to get up, it fell out. And a nurse rushed in. "I don't think you can get out of bed just yet," she said as she put him back in his bed and reinserted the tube. Jeff sat there with no vision, no idea what his surroundings were. Finally, after hours, he heard his mother. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked. Jeff couldn't answer, though his face was covered. He was unable to speak. "Well, honey, I have great news. After all the witnesses told the police that Randy confessed of trying to attack you, they decided to let Lou go." This made Jeff almost bolt up, stopping halfway, remembering the tube coming out of his arm. "He'll be out by tomorrow, and then you two will be able to be together again." Jeff's mother hugs Jeff and says her goodbyes. The next couple weeks were those where Jeff was visited by his family. Then came the day when his bandages were to be removed. His family were all there to see it. What would he look like? As the doctors unwrapped the bandages from Jeff's face, everyone was on the edge of their seats. They waited until the last bandage holding the cover of his face was almost removed. "Let's hope for the best," said the doctor, who quickly pulls the cloth, letting the rest fall from Jeff's face. Jeff's mother screams at the sight of his face. Lou and Jeff's dad stare awestruck at his face. What happened to my face?" Jeff said. He rushed out of bed and ran to the bathroom and looked in a mirror to find the cause of the distress. His face, it's horrible. His lips were burnt a deep shade of red. His face turned a pure white color, and his hair singed from brown to black. He slowly put his hand to his face. It had a sort of leathery feel to it now. He looked back at his family, then back at the mirror. "Jeff," said Lou, "it's not that bad." "Not that bad," said Jeff. "It's perfect." His family was equally surprised. Jeff started laughing uncontrollably. His parents noticed that his left eye and hand were twitching. "Jeff, are you okay?" "Okay, I've never felt more happy." "Look at me. His face goes perfectly with me." He couldn't stop laughing. He stroked his face, feeling it, looking at the mirror. What caused this? Well, you may recall that when Jeff was fighting Randy, something in his mind, his sanity snapped. Now he was left as a crazy killing machine. That is, his parents didn't know. "Doctor," said Jeff's mom, "is my son all right? In the head?" "Oh, yes. This behavior is typical for patients that have taken very large amounts of painkillers. If his behavior doesn't change in a few weeks, bring him back here and we'll give him a psychological test." "Oh, thank you, doctor." Jeff's mother went over to Jeff. "Jeff, sweetie, it's time to go." Jeff looks away from the mirror. His face still formed into a crazy smile. "Okay, Mommy." His mother took him by the shoulder and took him to get his clothes. "This is what came in," said the lady at the desk. Jeff looked down to see the black dress pants and white hoodie her son wore. Now they were clean of blood and stitched together. Jeff's mother led him to his room and made him put his clothes on. They left not knowing this was their final day of life. Later that night, Jeff's mother woke up to a sound coming from the bathroom. It sounded as if someone was crying. She slowly walked over to see what it was. When she looked into the bathroom and saw a horrendous sight, Jeff had taken a knife and carved a smile into his cheeks. "Jeff, what are you doing?" asked his mother. Jeff looked over to his mother. "I couldn't keep smiling, Mommy. It hurt after a while. Now I can smile forever." Jeff's mother noticed his eyes ringed in black. "Jeff, your eyes." His eyes were seemingly never closing. "I couldn't see my face. I got tired and my eyes started to close. I burned out the eyelids so I could forever see myself, my new face. Jeff's mother slowly started to back away, seeing her son was going insane. What's wrong, Mommy? Aren't I beautiful? Yes, son, she said. Yes, you are. Let me go get Daddy so he can see your face. She ran to the room and shook Jeff's dad from his sleep. Honey, get the gun, wait. She stopped as she saw Jeff in the doorway holding a knife. Mommy, you lied. That's the last thing they hear as Jeff rushes them with the knife, gutting both of them. His brother Lou woke up, startled by some noise. He didn't hear anything else, so he just shut his eyes and tried to go back to sleep. As he was on the border of slumber, he got the strangest feeling someone was watching him. He looked up before Jeff's hand covered his mouth. He slowly raised the knife, getting ready to plunge it into Lou. Lou thrashed here and there, trying to escape Jeff's grip. Shh, Jeff said. Just go to sleep. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so that was the end of the original, and my final thoughts on it is, it was pretty decent. I mean, I admit there were some fairly unrealistic parts of it, such as, the doctors, not giving him a psych evaluation sooner, but it lended itself to the story very well, and all in all, it sounds like the kind of thing that could happen if people were pushed too far like that. Let me just check something. Okay. Yeah. All right. And other than that, it's pretty much what you would need from a fictional story for what it's worth. It's got the motive. It's got the mystery factor of, how in the world is he feeling this urge to kill even before he gets disfigured like this? Now, for the reboot, apparently it sets itself a little more realistically than the original, so we're going to kind of get the sense that, okay, it starts out innocently enough, and then things gradually... Well, to put it bluntly, the reboot appears to be like twice the length of the original. So it's probably going to go into more depth as to, what thoughts were going into the original author's head at the time that they wanted to produce this. So without further ado, here, let's do the Jeff the Killer reboot. Alright. The day Jeffrey Woods and his family arrived at their new home, the sky was overcast and the weather was muggy. The gray sky seemed to punctuate his mood. Jeff was not thrilled to be here. Their new home was beautiful, though. A true example of his father's newfound success, but still, it wasn't the home he'd known. A week after they settled in, Jeff and Lou woke up early. The sky was crisp and gorgeous blue, and although the Louisiana heat was playing its usual cruel tricks, the brothers decided that a morning bike ride to explore the area would be just the right ticket to combat the slight pangs of homesickness they'd both been experiencing the last week. I miss home, Lou blurted out as Jeff was smearing salsa on the microwave burrito that would serve as his breakfast. Me too, Lou, but I guess this is home now. So we just sort of have to make the most of it. I know, but all of our friends and stuff are back in New Orleans. Remember that building we'd always sneak up on top of and watch the city lights come on? I miss that, Lou responded, sounding down. Yeah, in ZM Video, the owner knew us and would always let us rent R-rated movies without our parents, and he'd always hook us up with a free video game rental if we got a few movies. Yeah, I miss that too, but Lou, we have to. Lou interrupted. I know we have to make the most of this, but still, this place just seems so fake. And Mom and Dad still treat us like we aren't even here. Yep, they do. I was sort of hoping this new house would improve their mood, but what can we do? Lou had no answer. Jeff finished his breakfast and the two boys left the house to mount their bikes and explore around a bit more. As it turned out, the subdivision they moved into was rather close to a cluster of stores and a small shopping center. Village Shopping Center was the name of the short row of businesses. Within these were a Pizza Hut, a Chinese restaurant, a tobacco store, a Sprint store, and what Jeff and Lou were most excited about, a video store. We'll have to get our mom or dad to come down with us, to come down here and open up an account so we can rent movies, Lou mentioned as Jeff flipped a box to read the description of a horror movie. Shit, you're right, Jeff snapped, feeling a bit of frustration at this thought. He knew getting his parents to actually come down here and set up a membership would take forever, since their usual after-work routine was to go into separate rooms until they got hungry enough to come out and speak. Jeff glanced over at a girl who was working behind the counter. Maybe I can go over there and sweet-talk her into giving us accounts, he joked. Yeah, right, Jeff. One look at you and she'll probably ban us, Lou remarked back, a smile broad on his face. You doubt me, little man? Doubt you? The guy who's kissed two girls and almost touched a boob? Never. Please, go on over and lay on all the charm. Whatever, I totally could have banged that girl, but her parents came home and... Last time you told me that story, you said her parents were out of town and her sister came home. Jeff became flustered, and in the process of trying to make yet another comeback, the girl behind the register removed all doubt by speaking to the boys herself. Hey, aren't those your bikes? The woman asked, pointed towards the glass window. Jeff and Lou looked over and saw three boys outside, two of which were riding around in circles on the Woods brothers' bikes. They spun around them and then jumped off, letting the bikes crash into the pavement, just to stand them up and ride them again. The two boys riding the bikes were both slim in build, while a heavier boy stood on the sidewalk, drinking a Red Bull and watching. Jeff and his brother made their way towards the doors of the video store when the fat kid saw them coming. Jeff couldn't hear what he said to his two friends, but he made sort of a gesture while shouting. The other two boys dumped the bikes where they lay and walked towards the sidewalk directly towards the two brothers. Those your bikes? One of the boys asked Jeff and Lou as Jeff and Lou entered the summer heat. Yeah, why are you riding them? Lou asked sharply. We just saw them there, man. Relax. Figured someone just left them out for us. The same boy responded as his two friends joined him on the other side. Jeff, determined to make a good start here, tried to change the course of this confrontation. Well, they're ours. We just moved here about a week ago. We live over on Fairmont Avenue, a few blocks from here. We're just checking out the neighborhood. Jeff hoped that a civil tone could turn things around, but he could tell just by the insolent look on the kid's face that this was a difficult gamble. Good for you, you moved somewhere, the fat kid remarked. Oh yeah, Troy, the first boy spoke. They moved into that piece of shit house with the gravel driveway. I was wondering who would move into that place. Well, Randy, now we know, the big kid apparently named Troy replied. Jeff, still trying to salvage the conversation, tried peaceful banter once more. Okay, so you're Troy and you're Randy. Well, I'm Jeff and this is my brother Lou. We just moved here from New Orleans. You ain't in New Orleans now, third boy who just now decided to speak remarked. Yeah, and the fuck are you to call us by our names? Randy asked, that insolent, privileged smile never leaving his face. Jeff smiled and responded to Randy, well, I guess I could have called you a fucking asshole, but I figured I would give you the benefit of the doubt. In that moment, a flare of rage replaced the smirk that had rested on Randy's face throughout the entire exchange. The other two boys and Troy, and the still unknown third member of his band, seemed to momentarily struck silent. Perhaps they weren't used to being stood up to. Well, I'm sorry, was that language too adult for you? Jeff asked. And you, quiet boy, we know this isn't New Orleans. Jeff stated to the slim kid that it reminded him of his geographical locations, because if this was New Orleans, you three would already have gotten your asses kicked for touching someone else's shit. Boy, this story is very well built up and spirited compared to the previous one. And we haven't even gotten to the murder part yet. The slim kid looked back and forth at his two friends. However, Randy, clearly the leader, seemed to know what to say. Keith, you gonna let this little bitch talk to you like that? Jeff knew this part, and while he wanted quite badly to sock Randy and his pals around. A real concern suddenly invaded his mind. If he and Lou got into a fight on their first week in this new neighborhood, their parents would freak. He could practically hear it now. And while things had been far from perfect in their home, even after the move, there was a peace that had fallen over the family, and Jeff, fighting his urges, decided to do his best to keep it. Jeff looked over the three very well-dressed, very privileged-looking suburban kids before them and dismissed them. You guys are boring. Come on, Lou. Let them continue on their play dates without us. Lou laughed at that and followed behind his brother towards the bikes. However, Randy and his little gang of would-be toughs would have none of that. They moved to block Jeff and his brother once again. "Where are you going, pussy?" Randy asked, shoving Jeff. Jeff could tell that Shove had no real conviction. Randy was just trying to figure him out, seeing where his buttons were. He'd push harder eventually, but Jeff swallowed the slowly building anger within him once more. Lou took a bit more exception to the shove. "We're going to your mom's house. Me and my brother saved up a couple of dollars from doing chores, and we hear she doesn't charge much." Oh, man. This is supposed to be a scary story, but I'm just laughing so much right now. As the words left Lou's mouth, Randy appeared to only register a small portion of it all. Randy Hayden had grown up in Mandeville. His father was a partner at a local firm that made a lot of money. Something else that Jeff would soon come to learn. Randy and his friends were, while the same age as Jeff, had grown up in very different circumstances. They were used to being listened to. They were used to being feared. In fact, Randy, the target of his insult, just stood there. It was actually Troy, the fat kid, who stepped forward, fist-balled and squinted in anger. "Who are you talking to?" Troy shouted as he took a wild swing at Lou. Lou, who was both in better shape and had sparred with Jeff a time or two during his time spent boxing, was able to avoid the punch, but just barely. Had that been all, it may have once again ended there. Troy was taken by surprise at Lou's speed. He actually didn't attempt another punch. However, these were bullies, kids that ran in a pack for a reason. The skinny one, Keith, just stepped around and threw a punch that connected with the left side of Lou's face. Jeff had seen enough. He'd been shocked how quickly this evolved into blows, even though he'd expected it almost from the start. When he'd first met Randy and his friends, he'd been curious. From there, he developed an annoyance with them, and slowly that annoyance had evolved into anger. However, upon seeing Lou punched, seeing a small trickle of blood form on his brother's lower lip, upon seeing the smug look of satisfaction on Keith's face, that anger that Jeff felt suddenly exploded into a rage that he'd never felt before in his life. Jeff Woods did not hesitate. He stepped forward, his feet automatically falling into the correct stance that he'd learned from the boxing classes his father once enrolled him into, and delivered a powerful right hand to Keith's face. The skinny boy had no time to register shock or pain. The punch caught him by surprise and his knees buckled. Keith went to the ground in a heap of confusion and dawning fear. Randy, the so-called leader here, was almost too shocked to move. He'd quite a lot of experience starting fights, but no real time logged in losing them. He'd never felt control of a situation slip. He was used to being in charge. So now seeing one of his friends go down so quickly and easily left him in a state of shock that he had no idea how to dress. Troy, on the other hand, seemed to have a plan. Throw another punch. He moved towards Jeff deceptively faster than his weight would seem to allow, and threw two equally fast punches. Jeff, however, had no problem sidestepping both attempts. Troy, seeming lost for action, actually dropped his arms as if to say, "Gee, what do I do now?" Jeff had the answer. He moved in, throwing 3 hooks to Troy's stomach. The hefty kid's eyes went wide as pie pans. A fitting analogy, Jeff thought. He staggered back, clutching his throbbing stomach. Jeff wasted no time and stepped in once more, fetching a sharp punch to the big kid's jaw, causing Troy to promptly fall on his ass. Jeff was reminded of King Hippo from the Punch-Out game he used to play. He couldn't help but smile. Jeff now turned his focus on Randy. He advanced on the boy, feeling something new forming inside him. He still felt the anger, the rage, actually, at the antics of these 3 assholes. They had the nerve to mess with their bikes, the nerve to insult 2 kids they'd never met before, and of course the ultimate offense, touching his brother. However, mixed in with this rage was also a sweet and enjoyable pleasure. Not only was he kicking their asses, but he was loving every second of it. It was as though the joy of showing them up was perfectly blending with the rage he felt towards them. Together it formed into a sadistic, controlled sense of power. That is until Lou stepped in front of him. "Jeff, stop, that's enough." "Why stop now, Lou? They wanted this," Jeff replied in a flat voice that Lou had never heard come from his brother's mouth. "She's calling the cops, look," Lou shouted again. This time Jeff came back to reality long enough to listen. He glanced over at the video store clerk and saw her on her phone, talking frantically and pointing towards the parking lot. Suddenly, Jeff's strange sadistic haze collapsed and he regained his former self. "Fuck, let's go," he stated quickly, and he and Lou mounted their bikes and rode towards the parking lot exit. "Yeah, you better fucking run," Randy called behind them. Jeff and Lou paid no mind and pedaled away. A few blocks down the street, they dismounted their bikes and began to walk them together. At first, neither brother spoke, but then Lou broke the silence. "Jeff, thank you for standing up for me back there. Thank you." "Yeah, those guys were pieces of shit. They had it coming," Jeff replied, looking down the street as they walked. "Wait, what? What happened? I've never seen you like that before." "Just defending myself, Lou." "What was I supposed to do? Let them beat you up?" "I bet they go to our school. I bet we'll see them there, and they won't forget this." "Who cares? We didn't ask to move here. We didn't ask for any of this. Mom and Dad just wanted a bigger house and a nicer neighborhood, and we were along for the ride whether we liked it or not. Think I give a shit what these rich asshole kids think of us?" Jeff stated and went back to looking at his feet. "Think we'll get in trouble?" Lou asked. "For what, defending ourselves?" "Yeah, I guess you're right. They did start it," Lou answered. And to the brothers, the matter was closed. However, things were far from over. They found that the trouble they believed they'd escaped was in fact waiting for them at their front door. Jeff and Lou saw the police cars well before they arrived at their driveway. 2 cop cars both parked in front of the house. Both of them felt their stomachs dropped as they knew why the police were there. The brothers entered the living room to see their parents sitting on the couch, the 2 cops standing up, leaning on a wall, writing in their notebooks. "What did you 2 do?" Sheila practically screeched as the 2 boys entered the house. Lou, younger and less centered than Jeff, began to fall on the defensive. "Some kids tried to jump us down by the video store. They were messing with our bikes, and when we went outside they got in our faces." "That's not the way we heard it," Matt Woods interjected, his voice firm and ripe with anger and dissatisfaction. "No, Dad, that's what happened," Jeff began to explain. "We're down at the friendly video looking around the store when these 3 kids started riding around on our bikes. All we did was walk outside and these kids started talking trash to us, just provoking a fight. When we tried to leave, one of them punched Lou." Finally, one of the 2 cops spoke. His name tag read Williamson. "Boys, we have some serious complaints about the 2 of you. From what eyewitnesses at the shopping center say, you 2 started the conversation with Randy and his friends. And you'll notice that in this particular case, it wasn't that he particularly stabbed anyone, but rather that he beat someone up. And another difference we notice right away is that neither the cops nor the parents are remotely on their side at all, as per usual. But you're about to see that this might be a systemic thing rather than just, they're assholes being assholes. Jeff took notice at how familiar the cop's tone was when he said Randy's name. This was a small town after all, and there was a good chance that this cop coached Randy in Little League or drank beers with his dad. Hell, it was even possible the cop could be an uncle to one of the bullies. "No, sir," Jeff replied. "We didn't start it. They did. We just wanted our bikes. We just wanted to leave. They blocked us." Williamson continued as though he heard nothing. Jeff said, "Several witnesses, including the video store clerk, say that you swung first. They said that the boys were riding your bikes, but let me ask you this. Did you chain your bikes to anything?" Note, they don't deny the fact that these people were provoking them by riding the bikes, but they seem to be blaming the victim in this case. "Or did you just leave them outside the store?" "What's that matter?" Lou demanded. "Well, son, if you just left your bikes lying around in the street, you can't exactly blame Randy and his friends for riding them, now can you? It'd be different if you'd secured them somehow, but you just left them there." "Mom, Dad, you're not buying this crap, are you? You know me and Lou don't start fights. When have we ever? These 3 punks messed with us, and if you can't tell that these cops are taking their sides, then you need to open your eyes." Jeff knew he was skating on thin ice, but that rage, it demanded some sort of satisfaction. Jeffrey, do not speak about these officers in that tone of voice, and do not speak to us that way either. Now, it's pretty obvious you two aren't happy here, that you miss your old home, but starting fights in the street isn't going to change anything. Jeff's mother snapped back. Listen, boys, you're lucky. None of the parents want to press charges. This will be reported as a simple scuffle between teenagers. But be advised, you're both on notice. This is a quiet town, not like New Orleans. We don't tolerate this sort of behavior over here. If you see Randy, Keith, or Troy, I highly suggest you tell them you're sorry. We'll be keeping an eye on both of you, so don't let this happen again. You don't want to have an arrest record, do you? Jeff felt his anger bubble over, and he could not hold his tongue. Who is he to you, Officer Williamson? Is Randy your nephew? Is he a friend's son? Or maybe you go over and screw his mom while you're on duty. Which is it, officer? That's it. Both of you go to your rooms. Matt Woods apparently found that he wasn't mute after all. As he ordered his sons out of the room. Jeff and Lou walked up the stairs. However, they refused to hang their heads in shame or feel any regret. Neither of their parents spoke to them for the rest of the day. Jeff and Lou stayed upstairs, venting their shared frustration to each other. They'd been screwed over, even at their young ages. They knew that. They took some solace in the fact that they at least hadn't been arrested or cited, but still they saw what was really going on here. That cop, he was protecting Randy, Jeff whispered to his younger brother. No shit, his brother replied. We have to watch ourselves. We have to take care of each other. You saw it down there. Not even our parents didn't stand up for us. You know, what the hell was up with that, Lou asked. Imagine their fucking image. That's what's up with it. All they care about is fitting in here. They want to make sure they blend in with the rest of the Stepford families. No more fighting. If we see Randy or his two fuckhead friends again, we just walk away, okay? But Jeff, you can kick the shit out of them. Why would we walk away, Lou asked. Because I can't kick the shit out of the cops, Lou. I can't kick the shit out of Mom and Dad. And that's what would get us. Fucking Randy and his pals are protected here. You and me, we're not. So if we see them, just avoid them, okay? Please. Lou nodded. I feel like a little bitch, though. I owe Keith for hitting me. No, you don't. I paid him back for that. And paid his fat friend, too. I hope they just leave us alone now, Jeff sighed. Jeff and Lou didn't hear from their parents the rest of the day. They remained in their rooms late into the night and finally came down to eat after they were sure their folks had gone to bed. Lou said that he felt relieved about that, but Jeff had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. Jeff was correct. The next morning, when the two brothers came downstairs together to eat breakfast, their parents were already sitting at the dining room table staring at the boys, approving of nothing they saw. Sit down, Matt said flatly. What's going on, Lou asked. Sit down, Matt stated again, anger dancing on the words. The boys complied without further question. Matt Woods began his diatribe. Whatever that was yesterday, beating up some kids for touching your bikes, mouthing off at the police, disrespecting both me and your mother, that stops today. We didn't beat anyone up for touching our bikes, Jeff blurted. Shut up, Jeff. This is a one-way conversation, his father barked. That kid Randy Hayden, his father is a partner at my firm. Did you know that? Did you even think about that when you were assaulting him over your godforsaken bike? You just didn't think, did you, Jeff? Sheila added. How could I have known that? Matt continued. Well, I've spent the entire morning talking to his father on the phone. His dad is willing to let it all go, but shit, son, I have to deal with that at work now. Do you have any idea how much damage this could have done to me, to our family? Jeff felt that rage coming back and fought it with all his might to keep it stifled. Instead, he once again tried to appeal to the two adults' parental side. Look at Lou's face. They split his lip. Can't you see it's still swollen? Lou turned his head to better showcase the injury. My God, Jeff, so some kid played a little rough with your brother. Is that any reason to fight them? I wanted to make friends with some of the other families in this neighborhood, but thanks to you, I just don't know. No sooner could Jeff and his brother construct a proper defense than their father began speaking again. So your mother and I have talked this through, and since there are only a couple of weeks of summer vacation left, we've decided that Lou should spend the rest of the season at Aunt Marcy's place. We've already spoken to her, and she's willing to let him come out and stay. Both Jeff and Lou were floored by this decision. Both boys began to protest at the same time, but they saw the look on their parents' face. The decision was made. Why can't we both just go, then? Jeff asked, a last-ditch attempt to at least get away from his parents. Marcy doesn't want both of you there. She says you two are too rambunctious, and frankly we agree, Sheila answered. And so it was. Lou was shuttered off to his aunt's place in Abita Springs, Louisiana, a place even smaller and duller than Mondeville. If one can even believe that. Jeff watched his brother leave and then walked back to his bedroom. He felt that rage, however, it began to feel almost pleasant to him. He couldn't explain it. He was furious at the turn of events. His parents had turned their backs on their own children. However, through it all, these new feelings he was experiencing weren't all terrible. This anger, for an example, he could almost taste it. It felt like thick, sweet syrup stirring around in him. Of course, he knew the extra ingredient that would complete the flavor. The satisfying joy he'd felt when Randy and his friends were on the ropes the day prior. That mixed perfectly with the anger to create some intoxicating product that Jeff had almost craved now. He fell asleep lying in his bed thinking about that syrup, that thick, vicious, that seemed to work its way up the very fabric of his soul. He wanted it, yet he knew it was destructive, that nothing good could come from sampling it again. Several days passed and tensions were high between Jeff and his parents. Without Lou around, there was nothing for him to do except sit in his room and play video games. He went outside but didn't venture far from home. He knew if Randy and his goons showed up again, it would likely result in another fight. For a few days that worked well, and Jeff believed he could get through this. However, his mother changed all of that on an early Saturday morning. Jeff was awoken suddenly by sharp sunlight striking his face. He heard his mother humming, something that she rarely did. Even in his half-sleeping state, he knew that the humming was forced. She was doing it to wake him up and figured that the sunlight would get things there even faster. When she noticed Jeff's eyes cracking open, she sauntered over his bed and began speaking in a tone that simply oozed false joviality. At first Jeff had refused. Could his mother be serious? Did she really expect him to go over and make friends with Randy? He was still in bed when his mother stopped her incessant humming long enough to tell him to get up and get dressed. Once he learned why, he told her no way in hell. However, his mother was a shrewd manipulator, and she'd know exactly what would get the job done. She promised Jeff that if he did this for her, went over and made it work with Randy, that Luke could come home the next day. She'd sandbag Jeff right in the corner with that one. He'd no choice but to agree. A short time later, Jeff and his mother were pulling into Randy's driveway. Randy's mother answered the door. "Hi, you must be Jeff," she greeted. Jeff smiled wanly and confirmed that in fact who he was. That was in fact who he was. "Hello, I'm Sheila Woods. Nice to finally meet you in person," Jeff's mother announced, barging past her son and extending a hand to Randy's mother. "Sheila, so pleased to meet you. I'm Bridget Hayden. Sorry to hear that our boys had a little mishap the other day. You know how it is, though, with teenagers, hormones going crazy and all. Randy never gets into fights, but he explained to me that Jeff and his brother are still new to the area and haven't quite learned how we do things in Mondeville yet. Isn't that right, Jeff?" Jeff couldn't resist a small jab. "Yeah, sorry about that, Miss Hayden. Me and Lou had no idea that it was okay for your son and his friends to mess with our bikes without asking." Bridget, he gets that mouth from his father. He never knows when to shut up. "How about you and I go and have some coffee, and you can tell me all that great gossip around Mandeville while boys get to know each other the right way." "Randy's in his room, Jeff, upstairs, second door to your left. I'm sure you'll hear the sound of his video games or something," Bridget stated with very little humor to her voice. "Thank you, ma'am," Jeff answered and entered the house. Jeff knocked and heard Randy answer with, "Come in." "Hey, so I guess you heard our parents want us to hang out and get to know each other," Jeff stated with little conviction. "Yeah, that's my mom, alright. She doesn't like drama. Honestly, I think she worries too much. I mean, I'm cool if you're cool." Jeff sat down on the floor next to Randy and struck up a conversation. "So it turns out your dad is my dad's boss. He freaked out about the fight in the parking lot and was actually worried he'd get fired or something. My dad is like everyone's boss. I fucking hate it. I think half the kids at my school talk to me because their parents are somehow connected to my dad's firm." "Why do you hate it?" Jeff asked. "Because it's fake. This whole damn town is fake. You'd figure it out as you go, but trust me, everyone who lives here is just trying to pretend there's something else. My parents make me do all this shit, all the trophies and stuff, just so they can brag. That's it." Jeff smiled. "I know how you feel. My dad had me in boxing class a year ago because some coworker of his had a brother that worked the place or something. As soon as the guy quit, though, I was out of the gym the next week. I wish it was that easy, Randy responded. I hate playing baseball, but my dad will sure have me out there again next summer and the summer afterwards. It's like he knows I hate it, but he wants to make sure I'm out there with his stupid company name on the back of my jersey. Randy, why did you and your friends fuck with our bikes the other day? I told you, this town is fake as boring as shit. There's nothing to do here. Well, we have to find stuff to do. I mean, there are only so many times you can go and hang out at the video store or ride the dirt paths in the woods. All the girls here are stuck up. All the stores close early, and there's no mall and the movie theaters across town. We're just bored, man. So sorry for that, I guess. It's cool, Jeff replied. I guess I'm sorry for too. Things went too far. You mean the fight, Randy asked? That shit was actually cool. These guys, Keith and Troy, they just leech on because of my dad. It's like I told you, I'm pretty sure their parents make them hang out with me. The afternoon went on, and Jeff soon forgot that this was a mandatory arrangement. He actually started to find himself liking Randy. Sure, the first encounter was a little sketchy, but he was coming around to the guy, finding that he wasn't so bad once his idiot friends were removed from the equation. About an hour later, things took a new turn. Jeff heard the twin pops of two car doors shutting in near unison, and he heard the engine start up. He dropped the game controller and peered out of Randy's bedroom window just in time to see his mother and Randy's mother backing out of the driveway. Our parents are leaving, Jeff said. About time. I figured my mom would eventually talk your mom into going shopping or getting coffee or something like that. Jeff heard Randy pause the game. Hey, Jeff, come downstairs. I want to show you some cool stuff. Randy invited, and Jeff followed. Randy led Jeff out to the garage. It was hot in there. With the main door shut, the garage was well kept, though, and Jeff observed stacks of magazines underneath the workbench, and as well as tools and various other utility items stacked about. Sitting in the small closed garage with the late summer heat lingering about, Jeff began to feel a bit uneasy. Despite the fact that he and Randy had seemed to bond over the last few hours, Jeff couldn't ignore the sense that things were different now that the adults were gone. What did you want to show me? Jeff asked. Hold on, let me get it, Randy replied, moving the magazines out to reveal a small red box. Jeff watched as Randy removed the box and opened it. Check it out, my dad's flare gun, Randy announced as he waved the red tubular gun around. Oh, be careful with that, Jeff shouted, more out of shock than real concern. It's fine, dude, don't be a pussy. It's not even loaded, Randy said. However, Jeff watched as he fished out one of the flares in the out of the back compartment. Randy then continued to fill with the flare gun, popping it open and unloading a flare. Now it's loaded, he announced. Dad showed me how to use this last year when we went out boating. Sometimes I take it out back and shoot flares at the trees, but maybe this time I don't need a tree. The change in Randy's voice and demeanor was impossible to ignore. Okay, well, cool gun. Let's get back in the house, though. It's hot out here. Plus, I'm getting hungry. What do you have to eat? However, as Jeff turned to walk through the small door leading back to the house, the path was suddenly blocked by two familiar faces. Where are you going, Jeffrey? The fat kid Troy blurted out as he and Keith stepped forward into the garage. Took you two assholes long enough to get here. I've had to babysit this faggot all day, Randy shouted, a wicked joy present in his words. Sorry, Randy, but Keith here had to mow his front yard before his parents would let him come out, Troy said in a sheepish tone in his voice. It's cool, we're here now, Keith said. What the fuck is going on? Jeff asked, staring at Randy. He noticed that Randy still had the flare gun in his hands. I'll tell you what's going on, Jeff. You owe Keith and Troy an apology for what you did. You sucker punched them and then ran away. You didn't even have the balls to fight them fair, so now you're gonna pay them what you owe. I'm not gonna fight you, okay? I'm done with that shit, Jeff replied as he glanced about the room for an exit. You're right about that. You're not gonna fight. You're gonna stand there and let my boys get their licks in, then I get mine. When it's done, you get the fuck out of my house. I'll tell my mom that you got sick and walked home, and after that, if I see you again, you better walk the other way. I'm not gonna stand here and get hit by you or your friends, so just let me go home. How about that? I'll tell my mom we're cool and everyone wins, okay? Jeff asked. Randy then raised the flare gun towards Jeff. No, you stay, pussy. You stay and take your licks. Jeff felt that sensation once more, that sick, rich dark matter that swirled about inside of him. He could taste it now. It was heaven. In his mind, he imagined himself diving into it and swimming into it, letting it swallow him whole. He looked around and the sensation only grew. He saw Randy standing there holding the flare gun. It was limp in his hands, though, and the hammer was not cocked back. Jeff knew that Randy had no intention of firing it. He looked over at Keith, skinny and pathetic, a kid born to follow, Troy, fat and sweaty, breathing a bit heavy from his walk over, and of course, in the middle of it all, Jeff himself. He felt that pleasure begin to mix with rage, forming the perfect product. He tried to avoid sampling it. He knew that only regret could come from indulging in it. However, when it was placed so close, when the aroma and the promise of the sweet, savory flavor was only inches away, Jeff found that he could no more to stand against it than a ship in the ocean could stand against a typhoon. Jeff began to smile. "Why are you smiling at me? You queer for me or something?" Randy asked, a slight nervous twinge in his voice. "Am I smiling, Randy? I guess it's because I'm having so much fun," Jeff announced, and suddenly he lunged towards the unprepared kid holding the flare gun. Jeff struck Randy once in the nose. Randy's arms dropped, and yet he kept a hold of the flare gun. Jeff, without even needing to look, realized that Troy and Keith had actually taken a step back instead of advancing as they should have. Jeff delivered another strong blow to Randy's jaw, causing the boy to drop to the floor. Jeff now turned his attention to Troy and Keith, the two tough kids that had yet to actually make so much as a move in his direction. Troy had actually backed up a step and stumbled over into a stack of magazines that Randy had moved earlier. He took this opportunity to step forward, once again introducing Troy's round belly to his fist. Troy tried to stay on his feet, but Jeff's punches combined with the stumble over the magazines caused Troy to fall back, landing hard and striking his head on the concrete slab that was the garage's floor. Keith was actually trying to back away, however, Jeff was currently standing between him and the only exit to the garage, since the carport door was closed. Jeff took two quick steps towards the skinny kid and felt the most intense joy at seeing Keith stagger backwards, knocking back into the wall. The perfect blend of pleasure, control, and rage had come together. Jeff felt as though he was floating above the world. Somewhere in his mind he knew there would be hell to pay for this, but at that exact moment in time, he couldn't care less. He didn't care about Lou. He didn't care about being arrested. He didn't care that if his dad got fired. All he cared about in that fraction of time was hurting Keith. Keith tried to make a run for it, hoping to squeeze through the small gap between Jeff and the door. However, Jeff clipped him a hard right hand to his face, causing Keith to stagger back again. Jeff could see that his knees were buckling and took full advantage. He moved in, pinning Keith to the wall, and began delivering blow after blow to the skinny kid's stomach. Keith's eyes became as large as saucers. Once satisfied, Jeff stepped back and watched in demonic glee as Keith slowly slid down the wall, gasping for air. Randy got back to his feet, but seemed to have no idea what to do. "We done now, Randy? We good? Or do you and your friends need more?" Jeff mocked. "No more, we're cool." "How about you assholes?" Jeff asked. "It was Randy's idea," Keith said weakly. "Yeah, man, we didn't even want to," Troy agreed. The debate may have continued, but the sound of the returning car broke the tension. "Oh shit, my mom's back," Randy shouted, his voice cracking in a humorous way. It seemed the previous tough guy had all but shrunk back to a scared child. "So we'll just say that we're all hanging out," Keith replied. "No, the fucking flare gun. If she finds out I messed with it, I'm screwed." "So put it back," Jeff suggested. The sensation of rage was fading again, and he felt control returning. Grab the magazines, please," Randy begged. Jeff found that he rather liked the tone, that begging like a whipped dog mentality. Jeff was paying no attention to Randy. He was down on the floor, calmly gathering the magazines. He didn't care if Randy got in trouble or not. However, if his mother returned and found trouble, he feared that Lou might not be able to return home as promised. Everything else happened in a flash, both literally and figuratively. Randy, now in a panic over the trouble he'd be in if he was caught playing with the flare gun, began to sweat. As his hands frantically clawed over the gun, his thumbs pushed the hammer back unintentionally. He didn't even notice the gun was cocked. He was turning it over in his hands and trying to quickly disarm it. He then heard the sound of keys in the front door, and he knew that he had only seconds to hide it. Everything else happened in slow motion. The gun slipped from Randy's sweaty hands as he'd attempted to rotate it once more. He saw it fall to the floor, seeming to float on the ground rather than fall. Float to the ground rather than fall. Jeff, busy stacking the magazines, had only enough time to register Randy's shocked gasp. He turned to look in the boy's direction just in time to see the bright red flare hit the floor, the gun discharged, sending a speeding ball of fire directly into Jeff's face. Jeff felt the hot flash of heat and pain tear across the left side of his face. After the initial registry of agony, there was no more thinking. Jeff began to scream, clutch the left side of his face, and roll around on the floor. For a while, he forgot everything. As he plunged into that dark rich syrup once more, the rage almost serving to dull the pain. When he finally did come to a stable level of alertness, he realized he was in a hospital room. Half his face was bandaged, he knew that much. He wanted to open his eyes and speak, let his family know he was awake, but the drugs still had a firm hold. He was awake, but not quite yet functioning. He could hear several familiar voices, though. "Is he going to be okay, doctor?" Jeff's mother asked. "Oh, yes, ma'am, your son will be fine. However, he will have a lengthy road to recovery and will need your support." The flare struck his face and caused third-degree burns on his left side. "How bad is the eye?" Jeff's father asked. "Hard to say at this point. He'll need to see an optometrist for further review, but the damage appears quite severe." "In his face? What about his face?" Jeff's mother asked, sounding deeply concerned. "We're able to clean and treat the injury in time, so you've no concern for infection or anything of that matter. We'll want him on antibiotics for a while, and he'll need to have the wound cleaned and dressed on a regular basis, but all in all, your son got very lucky. The damage could have been more severe." "Doctor," his mother began again, "what if there's permanent damage? What do we do about that?" "As I said, an optometrist will have to examine the eye." Sheila Woods interrupted the doctor, sounding more agitated than before. "You're not listening. Not the eye. His face. What do we do to correct his face?" she demanded. "Well, ma'am, we've treated his face. Like I said, there shouldn't be a risk of infection so long as she cut him off again. Not the infection, his appearance. What can we do for that?" "Miss Woods, that's hardly a concern at this point. Once he's healed and back on his feet, you can possibly explore plastic surgery to repair some of the damage, but honestly, right now, we can't waste concern on how he looks. What's important is your son is healthy. He can expect to be back home in a few days, maybe sooner." Jeff's dad spoke again. "Okay, thank you, doctor. Can we have some time alone, please? My wife and I need to speak." "Certainly," the doctor replied. "Lou, why don't you go down to the hospital cafeteria and get yourself a snack?" Matt Woods suggested. "But I want to be here in case Jeff wakes up," Lou replied. "Lou, they told us that Jeff is heavily medicated. They don't expect him to wake up any time tonight, so just go. If he does come around, we'll have you paged," Matt replied. Jeff heard the door open and close as Lou exited. His parents both let out a long, shaky sigh, but Jeff was starting to believe it was not a sigh of relief, but one of stress. "We're going to have to homeschool him now, Matt. That's just what it's going to be. We're going to have to keep him home." He heard his mother rant, her voice sounding frantic. What I mean, he probably won't be able to start school right on time, but I doubt he'll miss a whole year," his father responded, trying to maintain a calmer voice. "I'm not talking about that, Matt. I'm not worried about him missing a week or two of school. I mean his face, Matt. You heard what the doctor said. His face is going to be disfigured," Sheila argued back. "We don't even know the full extent of the damage yet, Sheila. It could be minor. It could possibly heal, and you know what he said. Plastic surgery could be an option in time." "In time? What kind of time? A year? 2 years? What about the meantime? People are going to see him and they're going to talk. Is that what you want? He's going to be a pariah. You think anyone's going to want to have him around their kids?" Jeff was hearing all this, just letting it soak in slowly, his mind absorbed the words. He felt that rage return, sick, rich, dark, that syrup of raw, primal emotion. He wanted to scream at his mother and tell her to shut up, that he was the one lying here. Half his face burnt, blind in one eye, all thanks to her forcing him to go over to Randy's house. He wanted to ask her why she left, why she went off shopping to have her nails done, or whatever it was she did. He wanted to know why she'd leave him alone with a kid who just days before had tried to jump him and his brother. He wanted to know how she could care more about his appearance than the fact he was lying in a hospital. However, there was still so much more he wanted to know as well. He wanted to know how much more his mother hated him, how much more she saw him now as a, how did she put it, pariah. He wanted to continue to swim in the thick pool of of dark hatred that was starting to form from the rage and anger. This was a new one now. Before it was anger, then it was anger mixed with pleasure, but now it was anger mixed with hatred. And while he certainly longed to be free of it, while he certainly preferred the false sense of love and concern he believed he'd heard from her before, he also wanted to test it out a bit more. He also began to wonder, how would this new recipe blend with pleasure? How would it feel? Edwards began to speak again. He shot himself in the face with a flare gun. I always thought Jeff was more responsible than that. Don't even get me started on that, Sheila replied. I couldn't believe it when Randy and his friends explained to the medics and police how it all happened. Randy was just trying to show Jeff around the house and wanted to show him the collection of magazines his dad kept in the garage. You know, boys. He was probably hoping that a couple of playboys would be in there or something. And he said that Jeff found the box containing the flare gun and just wouldn't stop playing around with it. You should have heard the other boys, Matt. They told us they practically begged Jeff to just put it down before he got hurt. But he just had to show off. I just don't know what went wrong, Matt. I thought us moving here to a nice, quiet neighborhood would make everyone happy. Jeff, though, he just wants to fight us on everything. And while all that came together in Jeff's mind, he continued to swim in that black ichor of hatred and rage. The morphine drip added a nice touch of euphoria. Jeff could almost see himself plunging into the syrupy waters of hatred and emerging changed. Each drip brought him so much twisted pleasure that when he finally understood. He could sample the pleasure now, not because he was enjoying what was happening, but because he knew he could enjoy what was to come. Just as the doctor had predicted, Jeff was scheduled to go home a few days later. During his time at the hospital, he never asked to see his face. It wasn't until the last day he finally asked for a mirror. The nurse had come to change his bandages, as was routine. She was a pleasant woman. She spoke to him and asked him how he was doing. He enjoyed her visits, so on the final day when she arrived to clean and dress his face, he asked to see himself. Are you sure, sweetheart? Would you like me to call on your parents first, she asked. No, thank you, Jeff replied. I think I want to see it for myself first without them standing over me. I understand, she replied honestly without a hint of pretension. Once the bandages were off, she handed him a small hand mirror. Would you like me to step out of the room, she asked. Jeff ignored her and looked at himself, taking stock of the damage. Sure enough, his face was a mess, the entire left side at least. The flare struck him traveling upwards and burned a scar into his left cheek that extended to his eye. At first glance, it almost looked like he was smiling on that side. The scar was still bright red and the burnt tissue spread out on either side. Once it arrived at his eye, the news did not get any better. His eye was white, just a lifeless bulb pegged into his face. He closed his right eye and found that he could see nothing from his left eye at all. The scar just continued up the left side of his forehead. The damage was less severe there, however. The hair on the left side of his head was burned off, leaving a few strands to stick up here and there. Sorry, sweetie, but I have to put clean bandages on, she told him. Jeff smiled. It's okay. There'll be plenty of time for me to admire myself later. There was no joy from his parents on the ride home or upon arrival. They spoke very little, and there was a tension in the car that simply wouldn't fade out. As for Lou, he was thrilled that his brother was okay, but he didn't know what to say concerning the damage to his face. So after asking a few questions about the accident and the recovery, he fell silent as well. They walked into their home at dusk, and Lou asked about dinner. He suggested they let Jeff pick a place to celebrate his return home. Just go to sleep, both of you boys. Go to sleep, Sheila remarked. She and her husband both retreated to their bedrooms as well to argue or feel sorry for themselves. Who knew? Jeff and Lou didn't speak much that night. Jeff spent most of the evening staring at himself in the mirror. He kept pulling back the bandages and looking at the scars. Lou wanted to see them too, but felt it might be imprudent to ask. I'm glad you're home, Jeff. I really missed you, and I'm glad you're okay, Lou said to Jeff as he stared at himself. I'm not okay, Lou, and neither are you. None of us are, really. There's a sickness here. The only difference is now my sickness shows on the outside as well. Jeff replied, his voice flat as that on an answering machine. What are you talking about? Lou asked. One day you'll see it too. This is what happens, though. This is what happens when it all falls down, Jeff said, still peeking behind his bandages. Jeff, I don't know what you're trying to say, Lou responded. Jeff didn't reply, though, and after several moments, Lou left him alone. Lou went down to his parents' bedroom and knocked on the door. What is it? The voice of the mother asked. I think Jeff is acting weird. You may want to come talk to him. Go away, Lou, and leave your mother alone, his father's voice answered. Lou, being young, had no other ideas, so he returned to his own bedroom. He didn't know that those would be the last words he'd ever hear his parents speak to him. That night, Sheila and Matt Woods awoke together, both being light sleepers. It took little to bring them out of slumber. The sudden removal of their blanket as it was snatched from the bed did the trick just fine. They woke to see a small light coming from the half-bath that was situated in their master bedroom. The door was cracked only slightly, and the light source was weak. They could make out a human shape standing over their bed, though. What's going on? Sheila grumbled. Their vision came into focus. They realized their son was standing before them. Matt reached up and looked on the lamp next to their bed. Jeff was standing there, his bandages off, his disfigured face beaming down on them with a long kitchen knife clutched in his right hand. What are you doing, son? Matt asked, his mind still trying to shake out of the cobwebs of sleep. He's got a knife, Sheila screamed, grabbing at her husband's arm. I kept his composure, though. Sheila, it's probably the painkillers. He likely got up and got disoriented. Relax, for Christ's sake. Jeff tilted his head to one side, still not speaking. He stared at his father, slowly bringing the knife up, ensuring that he saw it well. Son, what are you doing? Matt asked. Scaring you, Jeff replied with no emotion in his voice. Matt, do something, Sheila pleaded. Okay, son, I realize you've been through a lot, but you need to go back to bed. I'm going to call the doctor in the morning. And Jeff moved across to his father's side of the bed, his head moving about, alternating between a normal-looking young man and the deformed ghoul that had been lurking in the shadows. Okay, son, you've scared me. Is this what you wanted? Matt asked, adjusting to the middle of the bed to put distance between himself and his son. Good, now I can start hurting you, Jeff spoke again with no emotion. His father had time to utter a single syllable, most likely to ask another question, to try and reason with his son. Jeff, however, gave him time to do no more of that. He lunged under the bed, driving the knife into his father's stomach. Matt attempted to defend Jeff off, but the wound to his midsection rendered him into shock, and his arms fell to the side. Jeff could hear his mother screaming, but paid no mind. He wanted to finish with his father first. Removing the knife, Jeff stabbed down his stomach 3 more times, quickly. And down into his stomach 3 more times, quickly. His father gasped and coughed up blood. His body jerked and twitched each time the knife found its mark. After the 3rd time, Matt Woods lay still. Sheila had backed up against the headboard of the bed. She wanted to climb down and make a run for it, but she'd balled herself up between the headboard and the end table in a frantic state of terror and confusion. She couldn't figure out how to do something as simple as dismount a bed. Jeff, why? Why are you doing this to us? She asked feebly. Randy started it. You must have known that, but you ignored it. Lou had a busted lip. You must have seen that, but you ignored it. I was shot in the face with a flare gun, but you believed Randy. Why? So you could fit in? Jeff asked in a low, almost growling voice. No, baby, I believed you. It's just your father's job, and we're new here, and... Oh, God, Jeff, please, his mother begged. Tell me about homeschool, Mom. Tell me about how you don't want to send me out in public because of my face. Tell me how none of the other kids will want to be my friend and how none of their parents will want to be yours. Tell me about that, Mom. Tell me about how nice it's going to be, you homeschooling me. Jeff, please, I was just stressed. I was worried about you is all. Please, I love you. I think you should just take your own advice, what you told Lou when we got home tonight. He wanted to do something nice to welcome me home. And do you remember what you told us to do instead? Jeff asked as he now crawled over, cornering his mother on the bed. What did I say? She asked, the question coming out barely a whisper. Go to sleep, Jeff snarled as he drove the knife into his mother's chest. He stabbed her over and over again as he did, and he finally found that perfect recipe. That heavenly blend, that rage, hate, and pleasure all mixed into one perfect formula. And for a while, Jeff became lost in it all. Jeff opened his brother's bedroom door, not surprised to find his brother asleep. He had dozed off with headphones in, so he slept through all the shouting. That was fine with Jeff. It was easier that Lou not have to hear all of that. Jeff sat down on his brother's bed and nudged him slightly. It took a moment, but Lou finally opened his eyes and looked up. Jeff removed his earphones for him. "You're free now, Lou," he spoke softly. "Jeff, what are you talking about?" Lou mumbled, still half asleep. "You'll see in the morning. I just wanted to let you know I love you. You've been my best friend. Remember that, okay?" "Thanks. I love you too. Now let me go back to sleep," Lou replied, already dozing off again. Jeff smiled and stood up as he left the room. He looked back at his sleeping brother one last time before he vanished into the night. Wow. That was, let's see. That was amazing. I mean, that overhaul, I mean, it was long as hell. It was a bit of an ordeal to actually read through, but my God, I'm thoroughly impressed with how much they've improved upon the original concept. I mean, this is just a whole nother level. But, yeah, that was, oh, what was this? No, that's the same thing. Okay. But, yeah, that was our show tonight. Regrettably, this camera only has like an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of footage it can do at any one time, assuming it's empty of everything else. So I think this is probably as good a place to stop it as any. And I thank you for tuning into Monster Mondays. As this is still Autism Month, I have the appropriate link to the poem that I'm doing for charity in the description below, as well as social media links if you want to just say, "Hey, nice show today," or something. I also have my website where you can peruse some of the things that I've put up for sale besides just the poems, like some of the books that I've written over time. And other than that, I think probably next week I'm going to see if I can redig up the Jane the Killer story, because it seems to have been buried somewhere in the internet archives, but I haven't found it yet. The creepypasta website that I got this from, source in the description, doesn't appear to have it, so I'll have to either look on a fanfiction site hoping for a recopy of it, or I might have to use the Wayback Machine to find it. And if ultimately I can't, I'll probably have to transcribe one of the original recordings and then do that. Or I may just say heck with it and just move on to the Sonic.exe that was featured in like the second episode of Monster Mondays, where Adam the Forsaken took him on, just so you guys can get a feel for what he was up against, if you didn't already hear it from some other narrator. Nevertheless, it's been my pleasure to read not just the original story everybody knows, but maybe the reboot of it that some of us didn't catch. I mean, I know I hadn't heard of this reboot until I looked up the creepypasta site, and I said, "Ooh, I'd better include this for my show, because that'll definitely take it to a whole nother level." But yeah, as I said before, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. All information of what you should check out or just, know about is there. And with that, that's the end of our show today. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Oh, and before I forget, Mom's not here, kids.